That scene in the book when they are climbing Caradhras, phew, that is actually terrifying. And today the video is going to be a bit different than the typical book analysis, because I had a moment happen to me that was eerily similar to the fellowships on Caradhras, and I just want to tell that story. Because what is Lord of the Rings if not an excuse to tell a tale or sing a song, as Pippin says on the way to Rivendell? So this won't be an analysis of any character or an essay about something cool that I read. Nope. I'm just channeling the real meaning and purpose of this book and going to tell a story of a time that I almost died while climbing a mountain. It's a wild hiking story. But for anyone who doesn't know, I am reading through Lord of the Rings for the first time and doing an analysis on every chapter in the form of a video essay. It's kind of turned into multiple video essays per chapter, but I am trying my best to limit them so I can get back to reading. And then maybe during my second read or so, I can do all the ones that I'm thinking of. But make sure you subscribe if you like that kind of content. And I'm doing some Harry Potter and Brandon Sanderson and Star Wars content with that as well. So make sure you like the video and also make sure you subscribe if you're into that kind of thing. But in 2016, I took a solo trip to the Grand Tetons. If you don't know what they are, you've probably seen pictures of them. They are stunning mountains. And I love backpacking, and I wanted to try my hand at something called the Teton Crest Trail. It's about 40 to 50 miles of backcountry in the Tetons, and it is absolutely stunning. I had a cousin who did it, and they said it was one of the best trails that they've ever done in their life. And I decided to go in October, which for me meant the park was going to be empty and I would have the whole trail to myself. Because, school was out and there was kind of off season for the trails in the front of the national park, so very excited about that. What I didn't anticipate was the weekend I was traveling, a massive snowstorm decided to grace the mountains. And when I went for my permit the first morning, they weren't letting people up the mountain because there was 3 to 4 feet of snow, and it was all impassable and incredibly dangerous. I was so bummed. But I decided to make the most of the trip, because 100 miles north of this was Yellowstone National Park. So I rented a car and drove all the way out there and camped and hiked for just a few days. I did a bunch of day trips, but another sad thing happened in that Yellowstone, the northern half of the trail, or the park, was actually closed because of snow. Not because the whole park was that snowy, but because 2 roads that went up to the northern part of the park were too snowy to pass. And when I got there, the roads that led up to the northern part were closed because of the snow. And the northern part of the park is the best part. It has the most wildlife and easily the best hiking. But midway through my trip, I heard via the radio that the roads were going to be opened in a few hours. So I took my car and sat at the intersection and just waited. I was first in line. There were a few cars behind me, but I was excited. And to reward myself for being first in line, I decided I was going to hike the highest peak in Yellowstone National Park, Mount Washburn, which sits at an elevation of 10,000 feet. It's not that high, but to my East Coast small mountain mind, it was huge. When I parked at the foot of the mountain, there was only one other car that pulled in behind me, and a very light dusting of snow on the ground. Not even a quarter of an inch. It was perfect conditions, I thought. I made quick conversation with the guy who hopped out of his car, and I started to prepare for the hike as well, and I knew I wanted to get ahead of him so that I could have the trail just to myself. So I bid this man, who was a 60-year-old guy doing a solo trip, I bid him goodbye and started walking up the trail. The first mile was easy and absolutely wonderful. It was a winter wonderland. There was a beautiful fresh snowfall and the whole trail looked magical. There were all these animal prints. There had to be 100 animal prints. I saw fox prints, bison prints, rabbit. I didn't see any wolf or bear, which was kind of a bummer because I would have loved to see those, but I saw those at other parts in my trip. But it was a beautiful first mile. The trail kept going for about another mile until I got to the base of the mountain. And from that point on, there are switchbacks up to the first ridge. And for those of you who don't know this, I'll maybe explain this a little bit later too, but this entire mountain is a switchback up to the mountain next to it, and then you go on this trail, this ridgeline trail up to actual Mount Washburn. I'll talk about that in a bit. But us East Coast hikers think West Coast hikers are weak because of switchbacks. It's a weird thing in the hiking community in the US, but in the West Coast, every trail is graded, which means it can't really go above a certain gradient. There's not super steep trails on the West Coast. But in the East Coast, if they need a trail to go over a mountain, they will pick the hardest possible route and have it go directly over the mountain with no switchbacks whatsoever. So When I first came to this first switchback, I put on my East Coast mentality and started plowing ahead. But I should have brought a bigger plow. Because going up the first switchback, there was about 3 to 4 inches of snow. It was getting in my boots, but it wasn't that bad. The second switchback, the snow got deeper. It was about 6 inches at the first section and probably got close to 9 to 10 inches at the top. The next switchback, I remember the snow was a foot. And it took me close to a half an hour to get through it because I sunk every single time I took a step. But I was determined to get over it. Especially with this old man behind me because I wasn't going to quit and walk down the mountain dejectedly. There were 2 more switchbacks and both of them had more snow on them. And the final switchback was around 2 feet of snow. And I remember after the final switchback, you come to this straightaway that goes directly to the actual Mount Washburn. Again, it's a ridgeline, so the whole time you're climbing Washburn, you're not really climbing Washburn, you're ascending the mountain next to it that connects itself by a ridgeline to Washburn. But the ridgeline, when I hiked, was still relatively flat, and the snow was just a foot or 2 deep in most spots. But there were others where the wind had whipped the snow up from the mountain so that it formed what looked like the roof of a house. And this was terrible hiking. This is so dangerous. And I didn't want to go to the edge of the ridgeline because, again, here's the conundrum. If you go to the edge of the ridgeline, you're risking falling off this thing because the snow could have some kind of ice underneath it and you could just slip and plow right off to the edge of this. But in the middle of this ridgeline, there's like 3 to 4 feet of snow buried. And so I had to plow through 3 to 4 feet of buried snow because I didn't want to die on the edge of this thing. And it was still dangerous because I could have slipped on one side or the other. And because this is snow that's kind of shaped like a rooftop, I could have just kind of fallen off and slipped and gone all the way off this mountainside. Super dangerous. The ridgeline was terrifying, but I was young and dumb. This is what the ridgeline looks like in the summer, and this is what the ridgeline looked like when I hiked. Oh, and by the way, you see those clouds that are coming in? Those dark, ominous looking ones. That's actually a snowstorm coming straight for me when I'm on the top of a mountain. Actually, it wasn't really a snowstorm, it was a sleet storm. The cloud is pretty much just coming over the top of Washburn and had enveloped the whole mountain in a storm that lasted for an hour. And so now I had to finish hiking up this mountain, and I had to do a little circle around this mountain to get to the top. It's probably no more than a quarter of a mile if I had to guess, maybe even less. That quarter of a mile took me an hour and a half. First, because I was so deep under the snow that every single step I took, I had to dig myself out. And this wasn't powdery snow, it was the sleetish snow. It was heavy and it was unforgiving. And every step I took, even though the whole trail felt wide, felt like I could slip and go tumbling down because the snow was just angled against the trail so that it looked like a pitched roof. I was hugging the rock wall that was Washburn, making sure that I didn't slip or fall because one slip in either direction and I would have been a goner. The second reason why this is so dangerous is because the sleet was cutting my face, literally cutting my face. It was so fast and so hard that it started to not only create welts on my face, but it started to actually cut my face. I couldn't open my eyes because it was so fast that it would instantly pelt my eyeballs and I couldn't see. So I am almost ashamed to admit this, but I climbed up the circle around the mountain pretty much with a towel around my face and my eyes closed. Or just barely squinting because I couldn't do anything else. And there was a moment on the way up this mountain where I had to stop and I had to double check my phone had service because I thought I need to call the park rangers so they can get a helicopter to take me off this mountain. It legitimately felt that dangerous. I know that sounds dramatic, but it might have been one of the dumber things that I've ever done. But it made a great story, you know? Slowly, I made my way up to the top of this mountain, and most of you think I'm stupid for even trying to get up there, but the only real reason I knew I needed to get up to the top of this mountain rather than go back was because there was a shelter at the top. It was like a fire tower or something like that. So if I can get inside, then I knew I'd be safe from the elements for a bit. So I slowly winded my way around the mountain and made it to the top. I ran inside the shelter and sat there trying to wait out the storm for a good half an hour. And it wasn't dying down too fast. But after another 45 minutes, I heard the door open and the old guy who was hiking behind me stepped in. The first thing he said to me was, "That was the dumbest decision of my entire life." And that was the moment I knew we were kindred spirits. So we sat on this bench and both relived our hiking experience. And the guy was a tough dude too. He served in the Marines and did a lot of solo travel. And he said that there was only one hike that he's ever taken that was harder than that one. So I just felt so justified. And I have to say, hiking from my perspective now, that was probably like the third or fourth hardest hike that I've done. I've done a lot harder of days and hikes. Crazy, crazy hiking experiences. Love it so much. Anyway, I bid farewell to this man because I had to go back because my campsite was kind of running out. I needed to get there at a certain time or they were going to give my campsite away. So I bid this man farewell, ran outside, took a selfie next to the mountain sign, and headed down the mountain pass as fast as I could. But as careful as I could too. And as soon as I passed the first circle, the cloud passed over the mountain and I hiked down the rest of the way in bliss and in beauty. So, all this to say, I understand what those hobbits went through. I know this was a wildly different video from what you guys are used to, but I just wanted to throw this in there because I couldn't help it. And it felt very much in the style of Tolkien to do this. I have a ton of other wild stories about my hiking trips. And I have a story where I met some wolves on the way that were pretty close. I ran into a full pack of wolves when I was doing this trip. But that's another story for maybe when we talk about the Warg Riders and maybe in the next book or something like that. And if Tolkien jogs my memory on any more, maybe I'll tell them. I don't know if you guys are going to like this video or not, but I just kind of wanted to take a breather and tell this story. Anyway, I don't expect a video like this to do all that well, but I just wanted to tell the story. Back to our normal programming tomorrow. But make sure you like the video, subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow.